Okay, my name is Bob Robinson. I'm the program director at NewDay Services. And you know, there's a lot that's been written and researched about trauma-informed and these kind of buzzwords that we hear. But we understand that trauma affects people. Trauma affects the fathers that come into our Focus Father class. So today, we're going to talk about how that affects our program and how we address those issues and try to mitigate the impacts of that. Because at the end of the day, for our Focus Father program, the 10-week program, we want guys to have real change. And if they have significant trauma in their life now, or maybe from their childhood, it's going to be a barrier. It's going to hold them back. It's an obstacle for them to learn and to make real changes. So through the course of the 10 weeks, we've seen that we're able to mitigate that trauma and get guys to a point where they can be successful. Because it's really all about the kids. And we want the kids to come home to their families, to healthy homes. As we say, hurt people, hurt people, you know. And so we've got to address that issue. So in a 10-week process, we cover a lot of things that deal with that. And so we want to overcome that because we want those kids to come home to a healthy family. We don't want them to be adopted out. We don't want them to stay in foster care the rest of their life. So there's a lot at stake here. And so we take this very seriously. And the program, I think, really addresses trauma in a big way. So 4 of us today, we want to have a conversation. There's 4 of us here in the room and online. So David Larry, to my left here, a wonderful young man. He's our Eastern Region Coordinator for FOCUS. And then we have Doak Gibbon, who's on the screen there. And Doak is our Western Region Coordinator for FOCUS. And we have John Smith, an incredible facilitator out of Dallas. He does our day class in Dallas. John, he's been around about 4 years and teaching and co-teaching. An excellent facilitator. So we're just going to have a conversation about this, but we want to set the stage first. We want to give you some definitions and kind of get us all on the same page of what trauma is. So we'll take it away, Doug.
Okay, so that's good, Bob. The conversation, we always have to start with what we're talking about. So we're talking about trauma. When we hear the word trauma, we need to realize this is something that describes an event, multiple events or experiences that have a severe, long-lasting impact on the individual. So these traumatic events can either be induced physically or emotionally, or both. And it has an impact to all the person, their mental, physical, social, emotional, and even their spiritual well-being. So I need to let you know that we probably have heard of PTSD, and we think of that as a single event and how that impacts people. But it wasn't until recently, 1999, that there was a study done with a large group of people, 17,000 people, over many years that shows how this affects children. So I'm going to very simply and succinctly summarize this study. It showed that the more adverse childhood experiences one has, the more likely they are to have increase in their risk. So if you have more adverse reactions, you're going to have higher risk. So it's important to know that these aren't predictive, but they're risk. So what do we do with all this knowledge? Well, here at NewDay, we're learning, that's how the FOCUS program comes in. We've learned that you can't erase someone's past, but you can increase what we call protective factors. So the curriculum that we use is all designed to increase protective factors. This is something mental health experts have honed in on. So very quickly, I'm going to just read what these protective factors are. Parental resilience, knowledge of parenting and child development, social emotional competence, social connectedness, and concrete support. So the way we deliver our curriculum is great, but as a new person, I can tell you that the method in which it is delivered is also increases protective factors through a safe, nurturing environment where there's support of people. So this is kind of a definition. Also, one last thing, trauma is not always just one single event. It can be multiple little traumatic events like bullying. So when we hear trauma, it's not just always one event, but many that can contribute.
Okay, you got anybody else to add? Anything else you want to add? That's good. I think you covered it well. So next, David here is going to talk about trauma in the brain, because there's a real physical, scientific thing that happens.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Doak has kind of set the stage for when we talk about trauma. And so if you have that trauma an extended period of time on a child's brain, or even, and when we talk about that, we talk about children, teens, and adults from 20, under 25 years of age, even to 30 years of age, and what that does to their brain. And what happens is that what we see is toxic stress. And toxic stress really is excessive activation of the stress response system on a child's developing brain. And when you have this toxic stress, as Doug talked about earlier, whatever those mitigating factors are, whether that's bullying or abuse, whether that's sexual or physical or mental abuse that happens within a family structure, or the children outside of family structure, it can really affect that. And so what we start to see, and what researchers have seen, is that it affects the immune system, the metabolic regulatory system, and the cardiovascular system. So the entire system of the body is affected over long periods of time. And how do we see that? Well, it may manifest for a child who looks frightened or acts out or has attachment issues, especially for a small child. Let's say, for instance, if you've had a baby, and many people have said, oh, don't spoil the baby, don't hold them, don't spoil them. Well, if you don't give them some type of love, isn't that right, Bob? Mm-hmm. What may happen is that you may have what we call attachment issues. Mm-hmm. And so that child grows up without being able to effectively love other people, or either be close to other people, because they've grown up under this stress, and they have attachment issues. And we see that in many times. And some of our parents and some of the fathers that we work with have those issues, and they're dealing with those issues. And so sometimes that manifests in the children. They've grown up with that, and they don't realize it, and their brains have been affected. We've had some cases we'll talk about later. And so what does that look like? Really, coping skills is a big deal, especially for children. Let's say, for instance, you have a kid who, a small or junior high school kid, something that you would think would be minor, that just exacerbates. And it's very hard to soothe that child or that adolescent, because they've not learned how to cope with that. And so everything goes from a 0 to 100, instead of, and sometimes we scratch our heads and go, well, what's wrong with that child? Well, a lot of times they're having this because they've grown up with this. They've had this traumatic event that may have happened. Maybe they had an illness in the family. Maybe there's a death of a parent. Maybe there's a parent who went to jail and has been incarcerated, and they not have to see that. Or maybe there was some abuse by that parent or parents.
And even a divorce or breakup is a huge traumatic. Yeah, one of the things that was really amazing to me when we first started studying this is just all kinds of different traumatic events that take place. Like you said, even just having bullies or having someone in the household who's been incarcerated, or mental illness. So there is a long laundry list of traumatic events, and it's pretty pervasive. Isn't it?
Yeah, and so this childhood, if it's extended, that's where we see issues. Extended all the time. We talk about this idea, and so the brain synapses, literally the things that fire in the brain, literally begin to change. And so we see that all the way through. So the size of the cortex changes, and so you get this reduced size of the cortex, the frontal cortex, which has to do with language and memory. You would never think that, I had a child who was under stress for long periods of time, that would affect it, but it actually does. And so that child will have some issues with that. And in the adolescent brain, what we see is problem solving, inhibition. So you see, why do I see a 12-year-old and you go, what in the world? Why is he doing that? What would cause a kid to do that, a 14-year-old to do that? And that's, again, that lack of impulse control that you sometimes see, because they've had this trauma-induced kind of things that's happened to them. And then risky behavior in older adults. So what we want to do is try to begin to promote healthy relationships, promote healthy brain development.
Well, why don't you describe it? Because you've always been talking about, they're not speaking in the front of in the back of their brain, right? Why don't you talk about
well, one of the things that happens a lot is that, especially, let me just give you an example of a father. Recently had a conversation with a dad, Bob, and we were talking, and he just was sharing with me how he just went off on the caseworker, and because his 3-year-old, he had a Zoom call with a 3-year-old, a visit, and the child had not eaten. And he was upset because the child wasn't responding.
No one was taking care of his
Right.
child, and they
And so-
to protect their
And
child.
so all those things that have happened to him in the past,
Mhm.
where he wasn't getting, he's recently released from incarceration, and some of the trauma that he had experienced, all those things begin to trigger, and he began to just explode on that. And so when we talk about this, is not being in your lower brain, which is fight or flight, having your hands up,
Mhm.
looking as if someone wants to attack you, but really have them think with their frontal brain, and so where more reasoning is happening. And so that's one of the key things we really want to work with dads. And I think Doug said that earlier about creating a safe space. When we do that, you no longer have people in the fight or flight.
Right.
They're now in the reasoning part, and they're able to listen. And as we're giving them information, it begins to change. The same thing for children.
They're not going to grow. They're not going to learn from
Right.
any kind of class or anything until they can move to the frontal part of the brain.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Well, that's good. And thanks for mentioning that story, because we do like to, it's good to hear the data we're talking about and stuff, but real stories. So John, you have a story about a father that you worked with. So why don't you talk about him and the impact of trauma?
Yes, recently, in fact, it was the last class cycle that we went through, had a father, his name was Kenny, and from the very first, you could kind of tell that Kenny was a little bit more reserved and whatever, and come to find out, he had just gotten out of prison about 6 months before the class, and he had I think it was a 1-year-old son, and the mother of the son had him. He and the mother had never been together, living together or anything. They evidently been together one time, that's all. And the mother physically abused the child. I mean, she almost beat him to death. In fact, I talked to the caseworker, CPS caseworker, about it, because his story was so over the top. I just wanted to be sure that I was hearing everything correctly. And his caseworker verified everything that Kenny had told me and said, yes, the child almost died twice on the operating table after that. So the plan was for Kenny to stand up. Kenny, from the day one, he said, I want my son. I want my son. I want my son. From day one, he was saying that, and he stuck with it. And the problem he was having was he didn't have any group. He didn't have any peers. He didn't have any family. He didn't have any support group whatsoever. And of course, the one CPS situation, they weren't going to release him to him with no help at all in his life. And so that's the problem he was having. Well, come to find out, his parents had deserted him, and he'd grown up with his grandmother and not in a good situation. And all that trauma had caused him to build walls way out from himself and wouldn't let anybody in. Well, and now he really needed some friends. He needed some family. He needed some support, and there was none there. So that's one of the effects of trauma on a dad that I've seen a serious effect. Is really affecting his future and the future of his child and their future together.
Hey, that's powerful. Yeah, and we have so many stories we could tell. I mean, we serve about 1,200 fathers a year in DFW, and so many of them come with trauma like that. So that's just a tip of the iceberg of what we see. So how can we, I mean, it's just amazing we can't even reach any of these fathers with the kind of trauma and the barrier that exists there. But we start on the very front end. So let me just describe to you on the front end what we do on our initial engagement. We call them, we don't wait for them. We show that they're important and they have value. So we reach out to them. We have a conversation with them. How are you doing? What's going on with you? We listen to them.
Right.
And that blows them away. A lot of times they'll say, no one's want to listen to my side of the story. No one cares about me and what I'm thinking.
That's right.
So we listen to them. We build a relationship. We build their trust. We listen to their story. And so all of that, building trust, security, and having respect, all of those are things that they've identified as key in helping lower the angst, be able to work to the front side of the brain.
That's right.
And so that's what we do on the very front end is we call them and we pursue them. Sometimes they stop, they start a class, they stop, start, and finally they can make it through. And we don't give up on them. David and I talked about one time, we said, we have to have more compassion for these dads here because no wonder they're having trouble getting through a 10-week class. And no wonder they won't call us back, right? So having compassion, which is being faith-based, that's important to us. But we just don't give up on them. We show them they matter, and they matter more than anybody else. So at the end of all, we're just building a relationship, and it's trust that we're building on the very front end. So it starts there on the initial engagement. And we wanted to walk through some of the areas in the curriculum that help mitigate the trauma. And so week one, I'll take that week, and we won't go through all 10 weeks, but week one, we set the expectations. We say, this is a safe place.
Right.
You can talk
That's
about
right.
your story. We're not going to tattletale back
That's
to
right.
anybody. We
Biggest
listen
rules.
to them. Yeah. And we let them know we believe in you. And I always say, this is not a deadbeat dad's class. Those
Right.
guys aren't here.
That's right.
You know, they're not here, but you're here. You love your kids. So we believe the best in you. We believe you're a good dad and you love your kids. And so it's a strength-based approach. So one of the things we do on week one, we do a list of kids. And they're proud to do their list of their kids. And that just shows that we value them and their relationship as a dad. So anyway, week one is a very important week to set the stage, to set the ground rules where there's safety, there's trust. We continue to build the relationship. There's transparency in where we're going. And so it's just about building that relationship with them and building trust with them. And then the facilitator that we have, every facilitator of our 14 classes, they will call them every week to deepen that relationship. How you doing? How did your court go? How was your dad's in the hospital? What's going on? And so it blows them away that we actually care and that we remember those things the next week. And so building that relationship and trust begins on engagement, carries to week one, and it goes through all the 10 weeks going forward. John, you're going to talk about another area that we talk about, the circle. Why don't you go ahead and hit that?
Circle of control that we present to them starting at week one and building on that every week afterward is just basically two circles, one inside the other, one smaller, one larger. In the larger circle goes everything we can't control, and we have them list some of those things and what they are. And in the smaller circle go the things that we can control. And as we pin them down as to what that is, finally they just say, well, ourselves, I guess, maybe just myself. And we have them put it to them in this way. It's attitude and actions. And those two things are all that we can control. And to give you the example, go back to Kenny for a minute. On week 10, we always have the guys give us a verbal evaluation of focus and what it's done in their life, what it's meant to them, how can we improve it, that sort of thing. And so the week that I was doing that with Kenny's class, it was the first time I was doing that particular session online. And with Zoom, it gets difficult to open it up and say anybody speak, because invariably 2 or 3 will try to speak at once, and then you can't pick out who it was. It's a mess. So I said, okay, I'm just going to call on you guys one at a time. And I called on somebody, and all of a sudden Kenny spoke up. And Kenny said, I wanted to be first. I said, okay, Kenny, because I was a little concerned about Kenny at this point and how he's going to handle this. I said, okay, Kenny, go ahead. And he said, from week one, you told us about the circle of control. And he said, I realized that I had been out here trying to control everything else, trying to make everything else get right, get in line. And he said, I realized I couldn't do it and that I could only control myself. And he said, that's the thing that hit me, and that made the difference. And you know what in talking about our subject today, trauma, a lot of people that are suffering a lot of trauma have had a lot of defeats in a lot of ways, and they feel like, I can't do anything. I can't conquer anything. I can't accomplish anything. And suddenly when you show them the circle, hey, here's something you can control, something you can do. All of a sudden it's something they can sink their teeth in, something they can get a hold of and really push it forward and put themselves behind it. And Kenny said that made the biggest difference in my life, is to realize what I could do and to stick with that. So with trauma and presenting the circle to people that have had this trauma in their lives, suddenly they have something real, serious that they can do and they can make happen. So I think the circle is a very good way of that, of combating that trauma and the effects of that in people's lives. I'll be quiet.
Thank you, John.
We love the circle, and a lot of people say that's the most impactful thing. But it gives empowerment, gives them a voice that they can change, so they're empowered to make changes in their life. So yeah, they're not dependent on everyone else. Okay, so the next part, David, why don't you talk to us about how we deliver this program and how that helps the
one of the things that we do, Bob, is we're facilitation. Let me say that sort of facilitation and not lecturing. And the difference is that with facilitation, you're allowing the participants to talk. You're allowing the participants to engage. And one of the keys of what we talk about, this idea of change. John said that earlier, and even how what's different about that is that we present it and then allow them to digest it. And so it's not about just giving them a whole lot of information.
Not a lecture.
No, we're not lecturing to them or preaching to them. And that's a big key, is that part of what we want to do is give some information and then allow the information to marinate. And so as it marinates and as they digest it and as we kind of chop it up and share it with one another, it then changes lives. And so the key is let them have a voice. One of the things with that, we want to be transparent. We want to build this idea of trust and this idea of collaboration. And so I think that's key. You know, you talk a lot about this idea of trust. When we talk about in terms of trauma, I'm not going to share my life with you if I can't trust you.
Right.
If you as an instructor are high and mighty, and there's no, as facilitators, we have to be transparent and share with them sometimes. Yeah, we have issues in our own lives and things, as we have challenges also when raising children, and this is what we've done. But facilitation makes a big difference in that. It's a clear thing of not lecturing, but
yeah, and just the collaboration that we're all learning from each other, and that's what a lot of guys. We graduated last night of class, Stoke and I, and they said they learn from each other as much as they learn from us. So collaborating with each other is not just someone dumping some information from a place of authority, like you said.
Exactly.
Okay, good. John, let's see. Why don't you talk about co-parenting? That's often an issue that our guys have to deal with. That creates a lot of a breakup issue. They're separated from their girlfriend, their ex. Talk about that.
In our second week, we talk about co-parenting, and we have the guys think about, and especially the ones that are not with the mother of the child anymore. They've had a breakup, and usually there's hard feelings in that breakup, and they have a hard time figuring out about co-parenting, because we try to get them to look back and think, okay, there had to be some good things about her along the way. What were those good things? And things happen, and suddenly things look bad. Now, what happens in that stress of the breakup to the child, and why it's important for them to find a way to co-parent. In other words, to find a way to get past that traumatic event that they've had with the mother, so that they can work well with the mother in order to raise the child effectively. So that week is a big one for co-parenting and getting past that trauma to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge trauma for, again, relationship breakup is like a huge trauma that people face, and it brings out the worst in people. That's what I've noticed over the years.
It does that.
Okay, Doak, I think we covered trauma pretty well, and maybe ACEs. Is there anything more you want to say? We want to.
No, not really not on the ACEs, but just as a trauma-informed care, as we become aware of all the adverse experiences our guys have, we've learned, as facilitators, not to say what's wrong with you, but more what happened to you. The way I like to put it is, what's your story? What's your story, David? What's your story, John? Versus judging, saying something's wrong. So instead of focusing on what's wrong, we want to learn about them. That's what trauma-informed care is all about. Being sensitive that people have experiences they bring in that impact them, not judging, but wanting to hear, validate their stories.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you painted a really good picture of what it is and how we're addressing it. So one of perhaps the biggest trauma, David, is their own father.
Yeah.
And that week 3 that we covered that in detail. Yeah. Tell us about that and how we try to mitigate that.
Well, one of the things too, and unfortunately, because just the numbers themselves, we know that many times as many as 65% of many young men in African American homes did not have a father. That number could be 50% Hispanic and 40% in white families or non-African American families. And so when you have this, so we have a large group of people, Bob, as you well know, large group of men who did not have a father. So they come here with a lot of baggage,
right?
Or if they did have a father, and some of them had really good fathers, and some had really good role models. Even if they did have a father, there may be some issues that with that father,
Right.
because it's why
Well,
they,
I mean, a lot of times you hear dad was in the home, but he was totally absent emotionally,
Yeah.
and he was just
Right.
physically there. He was a paycheck. That's
yeah.
what you hear.
And one of the things I like to share with guys is there's two types of, we call it being present and having presence. And present, present. You can be present in the home, but literally have no presence.
Right.
And many of us have grown up or knew people. You had a grandfather or uncle in the back. He's back there watching TV. And, you know, if the house was on fire in the front, he would never know because, you know, and people say, well, and everybody's on the front yard, but they don't even know where, oh, is he here? We didn't even know. And so how much influence do you have with that? And so we really talk a lot about that and forgiveness. Many of my dads have some anger issues with their father because he was not there. If he was there, they divorced early. And so there was not the support. Mom was a single mom and she had to do 2 jobs, or she just had to raise them, or grandmother had to raise them. And so he went off because he did some time with the state or just issues. And so there's a lack of forgiveness. And so one of the things that we do, and we go through the cycle of, we call it in and out circle, and we have the fathers talk to each other over 30 seconds and kind of share some different things and talk about, if your father was here tonight, what would you say to him? And that is very cathartic. It's become very emotional for some guys. It is the first time, and Bob, you and John will know this, that many guys will tell you, this is the first time that they've ever even talked about this. And they're talking to guys who are strangers, but they're sharing the deepest, most part of their heart about their father in an open, safe place where they're able to say it and get that thing out that it's been there for all their lives in many cases. And then and you see the relief of this.
It's a dramatic week.
It's a dramatic week. And so, and again, but it's all about creating a place of safety and transparency for them.
Yeah, it's amazing. They would open it up to a complete stranger one-on-one, and it works every time we do that. So yeah, obviously that's a huge area, and you know, that we talk about. Dope, one more last thing. Why don't you talk about the peer-to-peer support, because that's something that having a support system is, again, one of the
Right, that's one of the
that you want to do
protective
there.
factors. That's one of the protective factors. And last night was graduation. The things that I noticed as far as what these classes do to increase protective factors, number one, the engagement, us reaching out to them. We care about you. That seems simple, but the fact that these people, all of us, feel that someone cares is critical. The other thing I noticed, Bob, was that they made a lot of comments like, I'm not the only one that's going through this. We often have other people that have graduated come back to class, encouraging them to go on. So they see there's others in here. They support each other. We've set up a system where they have kind of support even outside of class. So that's critical. And then also working with other agencies and referring. So creating where we're not the only one. It's a group, kind of a brotherhood of guys supporting each other is very critical. And that's one of the protective factors. I know we also do help out with a lot of things that nurture them, that train them on how to recognize the developmental signs in their kids. So these are all things that will protect them against the risk. But the peer support is critical. And I know some of our guys, I found out, they went through the class and now they're facilitators. So that shows I've had enough overcoming to where you can do that too. So it's a tremendous program. Peer support's key.
Yeah, peer-to-peer support. Yes. Yeah, and we've seen that the most powerful classes are where we have a lot of people who have come back, but even during the class, they help each other. And graduation, I was blown away the first time we had a class. They're exchanging phone numbers. They're hugging each other and going,
Right.
Really? I didn't know this would happen.
Yeah.
And week one, they don't want to be there.
It's that brotherhood.
It's that
we talk
brotherhood.
about. We talk a
And
lot about that.
let's show a picture of a graduating class that happened before COVID. And yeah, we used to have before COVID. Let's see here. No, that's not it. You don't have it?
Yeah.
They can see it? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a
you can see-
picture. You see it. There's a picture of a graduating class. But week 10 is such a wonderful time of celebration. But we see guys change. And that's what makes it so
Right.
powerful. You see them change before your eyes over the 10 weeks. And the pre-post score, the scores that we get are great and so forth. But we get, they let us know when they get their kids back. And that's very much an encouragement. But I'll just close with this. CPS did a survey of all their caseworkers about our program. They said graduates improve 67% in their desire to complete other services. So as when they come in, they're just overwhelmed. We try to get them in focus early. They're 67% more willing to do their other services, which is going to help them be successful.
Right.
And then they also, 82%, the caseworkers have seen an 82% improvement in their ability of desire to work with their caseworker. So all that means is, man, we've lowered the stress, we've
Right.
dealt with some of these trauma issues, and now they're able to function, get through the system again, hopefully return to get their kids back and be an engaged father in the kids' lives. So, and that's what we're looking for.